Hello, it's
Okay.
January 6th, 2021. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'm very honored to be joined here today by Harley Schlanger and Helga Zepp-LaRouche. Harley Schlanger is a long-term associate of Mr. Lyndon LaRouche and hosts a daily political update on the LaRouche Organization website. And Ms. Helga Zepp-LaRouche is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute and is the wife of the late Lyndon LaRouche. So it's my honor to be joined by both of them here today. Today, here in the United States, all eyes are currently on Washington, D.C. It's a very big day. We're in a very intense period leading into January 20th, which is Inauguration Day, exactly 2 weeks from today. And these are 2 weeks in which the future of the American constitutional republic itself will be decided in large part. Let me put on the screen right now an image from a huge half-page ad which is currently running in the Washington Times newspaper, the print edition of that newspaper. As you can see along the top, there are four pictures: Donald Trump, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Lyndon LaRouche. And the headline reads, "Stop the Fraud, Exonerate LaRouche." Now, the text of this ad is it goes through the strategic situation in which it states that President Donald Trump, at this very late hour, has the ability and the power to flip over the entire geopolitical chessboard and do two things. One, call for the immediate summit of the Permanent Five of the United Nations Security Council, as was called for 1 year ago in January 2020 by President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Doing so would defy the entire war drive between the United States, Russia, and China, and instead bring these great powers together to confront the existential threats which are facing mankind as a whole: the pandemic, the looming famine, the economic disintegration, and the threat of thermonuclear war. And secondly, what this ad calls for, and also what you, Helga, and Harley have both been calling for very vociferously over the last few weeks, it urges Donald Trump to take immediate action to pardon Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and to exonerate your late husband, Lyndon LaRouche. So let me start with you, Helga, and let me ask you this question. First, how would this combination of actions allow Trump to kick over this strategic chessboard at this moment in time? And also, since there have been some immediate developments in the Assange case in the past few days and really few hours, maybe you, Helga, and then Harley afterwards could respond to that situation in specific.
Well, one would hope that today's mobilization of the American people and also the Congress would live up to their task to not certify the election as it was decided by the Electoral College. But this has been a rigged game, and I think nobody knows this better than President Trump, who has been victimized by Russiagate, by an impeachment drive. And therefore it would be extremely important to, no matter what comes out of the present mobilization today, to use the remaining time, no matter what the result is of today, to overturn the chessboard, which is a rigged game. What he could do by convening or responding to the proposal by Putin to have this summit of the permanent five nations of the UN Security Council is he could completely overturn this effort of containing his efforts to improve the relationship with Russia through the Russiagate hoax. He could remedy the relationship with Xi Jinping and China, which is extremely important because we are in such an incredible crisis that only if the two most important nuclear powers, the United States and Russia, and the two most important economic powers, the United States and China, work together, that the problems of the entire human species can be addressed. Furthermore, such a summit would help to counter the plan of why they want to get rid of Trump by all means. That is, the financial oligarchy plans in the immediate future to impose what they call a great reset, which is regime change, which is what Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England, has been talking about, namely to turn over the power to the central banks to entirely go into green financing, which would be the end of the of the industrial nations. President Trump has said himself that if this battle is lost, America as we have known it will be lost forever and it will never come back. This danger does not only exist for the United States. We are in an unprecedented crisis, and there is the danger of a global fascist dictatorship by these financial powers. So that is why President Trump should really consider to overturn the chessboard and redefine the rules of the strategic game by convening or agreeing to participate in such a summit.
Now, in the past couple of days, there have been some developments on the front of the fight to pardon Assange, Edward Snowden, and as we've put into that, the necessity of Donald Trump to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche. Harley, maybe you can go through some of the specifics of what have happened with the refusal of the extradition by the judge in the UK of Julian Assange, but also upholding the charges against him and refusing him bail.
Well, this is a classic example of what you would call a completely mixed and contradictory decision. The decision she issued on Monday was to deny the extradition of Assange to the United States, where he's facing 18 charges, all of which relate to his supposed violation of the Espionage Act. Now, what he actually did as a publisher and a journalist was print documents, which were US government documents, which exposed war crimes committed on behalf of the Bush and Obama war policies. And for doing that, for telling the truth, he's being punished. While the people who committed the war crimes that were exposed are not only allowed to go free, but are calling for his continued incarceration. The judge ruled that the extradition was not acceptable, but on a very narrow basis, that you might say a humanitarian basis. She said that there's a danger that he would commit suicide if he were put in a prison in the United States, and therefore she would not support extradition. However, she also went on to say that the charges were in good faith, they were legitimate, and that there's an ability for an appeal. Then today, she denied bail. So on the one hand, she points out that the continued incarceration of Assange is damaging him physically and mentally. And then on the other hand, she won't give him bail so he could go into a house arrest while he's waiting for an appeal. Now, why is the Justice Department going to appeal this? This is the outstanding question. They have 2 weeks to file an appeal. And the important thing now is for people to call on President Trump to do what's right, to pardon him, because of the fact that he was telling the truth about the wars that President Trump pledged to end. And secondly, as a matter of justice, by doing that, you would be putting the spotlight on the people who committed the war crimes, who are the very same people who ran Russiagate and are involved in the election theft, which is being heard in the Congress today.
The exposure of these war crimes and these war criminals, where there's been no justice done, really shows you the hypocrisy within the U.S. Department of Justice. And this is what we have been running up against in all three of these cases just in the last several months. Now, the history of this goes back quite far, and the reason why viewers need to be educated as to the history of the unjust imprisonment of Lyndon LaRouche is because you need to know exactly what the background of this is, who the enemy is, if you're going to fight it to win. Let me put a quote up on the screen here. This is from former Attorney General of the United States, Ramsey Clark. And Ramsey Clark actually was the appeal attorney in Lyndon LaRouche's appeal of his case. He came in on this case because he saw what a miscarriage of justice, as in his words, they were. This was a letter that he wrote to the Attorney General, the former Attorney General of the United States, Janet Reno. And he said the following. He said, "I've been an attorney in this case, the LaRouche case, shortly after the defendants were sentenced in January 1990, and appeared as co-counsel on appeal and the subsequent motions of the appeal under these proceedings." And this is the important part. He said, "I bring this matter to you directly because I believe it involves a broader range of deliberate and systematic misconduct and abuse of power over a longer period of time in an effort to destroy a political movement and leader than any other federal prosecution in my time or to my knowledge." He goes on later, "The result has been a tragic miscarriage of justice, which at this time can only be corrected by an objective review and courageous action by the Department of Justice. Sincerely, Ramsey Clark." Now, Ramsey Clark was one of the witnesses testifying at a historic event which occurred nearly 25 years ago on August 31st and September 1st of 1995. And this was the so-called Man Chestnut hearings. This took place in Tysons Corner, Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C. It was a series of independent hearings that was hosted by a very distinguished panel of former congressmen, including James Mann from South Carolina, civil rights leaders, including J.L. Chestnut and Amelia Boynton Robinson, both from Selma, Alabama, religious leaders such as Monsignor Elias El Hayek, who was the core bishop of the Maronite Church. He was from Lebanon. Also, numerous very high-profile international observers, including Josef Mikluško, who was the former vice premier of Slovakia. All of these panelists came together to hear testimony regarding this widespread pattern of abuses at that time by the U.S. Department of Justice against American public officials, including Black elected officials, other public figures, and also predominantly the case of the fraudulent prosecution and imprisonment of Helga's late husband, Lyndon LaRouche. So several prominent figures presented evidence, including LaRouche's trial lawyer, Odin Anderson, as I said, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark, and Lyndon LaRouche himself. And also, Helga LaRouche made a very powerful and very moving presentation regarding the role of Lynn's ideas in history and the strategic context for him being targeted as he was at that time. So what I'd like to do is play a very short clip from Lyndon LaRouche himself during his testimony at this hearing. And I think our viewers will agree that LaRouche's words at that time were very prophetic in their prescience, and they echo very loudly in the present situation today. And then perhaps after we play this, Helga, you can elaborate a little bit on what the context of these hearings were.
Always there's that agency inside the Justice Department which works for contract like a hitman when somebody with the right credentials and passwords walks in and says, we want to get this group of people or we want to get this person. My case may be, as Ramsey Clark described it, the most extensive and the highest level of these cases in terms of the duration and scope of the operation. So my case is important in the sense it's more extensive, it's more deep going, long going. But when it came to getting me, it was the same apparatus that I find, in my opinion, was used in these other cases. And that until we remove from our system of government a rotten, permanent bureaucracy which acts like contract assassins, using the authority of the justice system to perpetrate assassination, this country is not free, nor anyone in it. That's my view of the matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Helga, you said in your testimony at these hearings, the biggest crime against LaRouche was the depriving the world of his great ideas. And that continues to be the crisis. And that's why the exoneration of your late husband is so critical at this time. Would you care to say more?
Yes, I think it is, among other things, the question of war and peace. Because one of the reasons one of the two major reasons why this permanent bureaucracy went after my husband was because he had just successfully organized a potential agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union at the time for the Strategic Defense Initiative, which was made official policy by President Reagan on 23rd of March 1983, and which was the idea to find a way to overcome the threat of nuclear war through technological progress. And there was 1 year of negotiations between the Soviet government and my husband in a so-called back-channel discussion. And there was an option, a chance that the Soviet Union would have agreed with it. Now, that was touching upon the power of the military-industrial complex, who had no interest on both sides, both the Soviet side, but also on the US side. They had no interest to get rid of this threat of nuclear war. And, that together with the idea of having a new world credit system, which would overcome the underdevelopment of the developing countries, which where my husband also was making incredible progress by working together with Indira Gandhi of India, the Prime Minister of India, with President Lopez Portillo from Mexico. So, this is all the policy issues which are extremely relevant today. President Trump has said repeatedly that he also regards the question of nuclear disarmament treaty with Russia as the most important strategic question. And, obviously, if you want to end the endless wars, which Trump has said many times he wanted to do against the opposition of the Pentagon, against the opposition of the military-industrial complex, that is the reason why they want to get rid of him. Now, that would imply the immediate danger of a confrontation, escalation against Russia and China. And, therefore, I think it's really extremely important that President Trump finds the courage, he has been very courageous so far, but to really overturn the table, because if this thing is lost, it's not just America which is lost, but we are immediately in the danger of an escalation towards World War III. And, if this Great Reset is being implemented, which Biden with his Green New Deal absolutely is backing, there is very little chance that the tremendous problems of the developing countries, which are hit very hard by the pandemic, by world famine of biblical dimension, as Beasley from the World Food Program said, 270 million people are threatened with starvation in this present year. All of these policies will be in great danger. So I think, the ideas of my husband are extremely relevant for the solution of the most pressing dangers of today. And I think his name must be cleared, because as long as this stain is on his name, I think people will be prevented to look at what he has offered and what would be the solution for the United States and for the whole world. And therefore, I think his exoneration is actually the most important strategic question of today if we want to keep world peace and get out of this crisis.
Well, there's a feature video which I would highly encourage people to watch, which is available on the LaRouche organization website, which is called The Case for the Exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. And it goes through extensively what the background was and has long clips from this hearing, including Helga's opening statement, Ramsey Clark's statement, the case as laid out by Odin Anderson. And this is something which President Trump and the advisors around President Trump, if they have not watched this, should immediately watch it and educate themselves as to what the facts of this case actually were. Now, the role of Lyndon LaRouche in history, Helga, as you just said, this is critical, not just then, not just to establish his innocence in that case, but to bring his ideas into action at this time. And it's both the power, but also the beauty of his ideas, which the world desperately needs. I was reviewing some of the statements by various elected officials, thousands of elected officials and public figures and religious leaders who signed the call from around the world for his exoneration, for LaRouche's exoneration. And one of them was former United States Senator Eugene McCarthy. Eugene McCarthy ran a famous political campaign for president, an insurgent campaign in 1968 against the Vietnam War. And he was famous for reading poetry to his youth movement before they would go out to campaign for him in New Hampshire and elsewhere around the country. He would have big poetry readings. And your husband, Lyndon LaRouche, in an article that he wrote, Politics as Art, said, some people laughed at this, but I know that Eugene McCarthy's action of bringing art and poetry into politics is actually what real statecraft is about. And when Eugene McCarthy was asked if he would sign a call for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, he said, of course. He signed this in 1989, and this is the quote that he said, quote, how could I not add my name in defense of a man who has brought Plato and Schiller back into politics and was sent to jail for it? So maybe just to set up my question, as our viewers know, the year 2020 was the 250th anniversary of Ludwig van Beethoven's birth. The celebration, many of the live concerts, unfortunately, had to be canceled. And Helga, you've called for this celebration to be continued into 2021 so that we can have these live concerts of Beethoven's music. I think it's a wonderful idea. And maybe we could say that if we used 2020 as the year of celebrating 250 years, the past 250 years of Beethoven, maybe we should use 2021 to celebrate the next 250 years of Beethoven. We should look 250 years into the future and think about what the world must look like in the year 2270, when hopefully mankind will be celebrating the 500th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. But maybe what I wanted to ask you about specifically, Helga, is, since it applies to the current topic which we're discussing, is to ask you a little bit about Beethoven's opera Fidelio. We actually used the music from the overture, the Leonora overture, in the beginning of this video, which I mentioned, the case for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. And there was a recent article by David Shavin in Executive Intelligence Review where he explores in detail the significance of this opera by Beethoven, including the parallel between the true story of Marquis de Lafayette and his wife, and then Beethoven's character, Leonora, and her fight in this opera to free her husband, Florestan, who was a political prisoner. So I guess my question is, can you tell us how you took personal inspiration from this opera and Beethoven's republicanism and his anti-oligarchism in your own fight for your husband's freedom and against his unjust imprisonment? And maybe more generally, what should we learn at this time from Beethoven when we think about the application of his method of thinking as it pertains to statecraft?
Well, that opera Fidelio, the only opera Beethoven composed, was extremely dear to Lynn and me already before this legal persecution started, because it's so beautiful. And there were many, many times when we listened to it together and, we're really happy about the love between, this couple. It meant an incredible amount to us, as I said already before. But when Lynn was put innocently in jail, it was just our life story. And, as you said, it inspired me and I think also many other people to not give up. We organized thousands of elected officials, chiefs of staff, bishops, cardinals, who all intervened on Lynn's behalf to set him free, appealing at that time, to President Clinton. And without him, I don't think my husband would have gotten out in the time he was released on, in these circumstances. But when he finally was out of jail, all these songs, O namenlose Freude, nameless joy, and people should listen to that. That is what the feeling we had when we finally, after 5 years of being separated, could be in our arms again. And the opera, as you know, is the fight for the freedom of Florestan, but then it turns into a celebration of political freedom. And the final chorus is a celebration of political freedom, which Friedrich Schiller has called the finest construction of art is the building of political freedom. So I would encourage people to watch this opera. Best would be in a performance by Furtwängler, who was by far the best, and you are an expert on Furtwängler, the best conductor. But think about, the emotions which are catalyzed by listening to this composition, because our fight for political freedom, to defeat the fraud against President Trump, to exonerate Assange or pardon Assange and Snowden and exonerate my husband, is a metaphor, is a synonym for the political freedom of all of humanity. So, my husband has many times said, we have to educate the population to think like Beethoven, to think in the form of agape, because that's what this music causes. And my husband has said many times the reason why it is so important to start to really study and understand classical art is because it is associated with the emotion of love. And it is my deepest political conviction that unless we change the population, that we get them on a higher level of thinking, on a more beautiful level of thinking, and make that the standard not only inside every country, but also in respect to the relations between countries, that only if we accomplish such a new paradigm that we have a chance to get out of this incredible crisis of civilization. So let Beethoven be our guidance, and then I think there is absolute reason to be optimistic that we can get out of this present crisis.
Thank you. And I think that music, that aria, O namenlose Freude, O nameless joy, I think that would also be the music which Stella Morris, who is the partner of Julian Assange, would be hearing if he were to be freed. She has been appealing to humanity for the father of her children to be reunited with her small children, rather than letting him rot and die in Belmarsh prison in the United Kingdom. Harley, let me give you the opportunity to maybe add a little bit more if you have some more to say, and to help us bring this broadcast to a conclusion.
Well, I would just like to say in summary, when you had those remarks from Lyndon LaRouche where he talked about the rottenness deep down in the permanent bureaucracy, that's what he dedicated his life to fighting, and to replace it with the principles of the constitutional republic of America. Now, the fight of Julian Assange to expose the criminal activities of people who lied to get the United States into these wars, which have continued for the whole of this century so far. And at the same time, what Edward Snowden exposed of the metadata collection, the security state, which had already been exposed earlier, right after 9/11, by whistleblowers like Tom Drake and Bill Binney. What we've seen is the absolute attack on the constitutional principle of our republic. And it's from that standpoint that you have to understand what LaRouche was talking about, that if you don't defeat this permanent bureaucracy, you'll never be free. That's what targeted Donald Trump. It has not been defeated yet. It's been exposed. It's very much out in the open. But I think were he to pardon Snowden and Assange and exonerate LaRouche, it would add to the whole picture of the corruption of this bureaucracy. And with that, publicly releasing the declassified documents on Russiagate While you're at it, also 9/11, the American people can see how right Lyndon LaRouche was in that warning and what must be done if we're to restore the tradition of the United States, instead of seeing the United States be viewed in the world as a banana republic, as it is with what just happened in the last election.
Well, thank you very much, Harley, and thank you so much, Helga. It's a joy to have you on the program here today. Let me invite you, if there's anything more that you would like to say to inform the next 2 weeks between today and Inauguration Day, any final thoughts?
Well, I think, the idea to have a special prosecutor installed, will be an important step also because, I think that this battle will continue no matter what happens today on January 6th, no matter what happens on January 20th, because what is at stake, is the question of, is the United States going to be a republic? Is the word of Benjamin Franklin and also George Washington, when both of them said, we give you a republic, it is up to you to keep it. And when George Washington warned, of the party system when he left office, these are things which are extremely important, because if the United States would be turned into an empire based on the special relationship with Great Britain, against which the American Revolution was made, and then try to impose an unipolar world on the rest of the world, this is the prescription to World War III. So I think, I know the issues inside the United States are extremely important, but they have strategic and historic importance. So therefore, this fight must absolutely continue until the Republic is being restored.
Thank you very much. I was actually reviewing the video that I brought up earlier, the case for the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, and some of the footage from these hearings in 1995. And I would really strongly encourage everybody to go back and watch that video again. It's very well produced. It's a feature documentary. Perhaps we can make the link to it available in the description of this video. It's available on the LaRouche Organization website. But during those hearings, one statement by former Attorney General Ramsey Clark really resonated with me, and I just want to read it as a conclusion to this broadcast. He said the following. He said, "We can and must have a moral regeneration and a faith and a belief that we can overcome, that a life of principle is the only life worth living." So again, I recommend people watch this video, take a look at the ad which is running in the Washington Times newspaper today, calling for the pardon of Assange and Snowden and the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche, and please circulate this interview as widely as you can. Thank you both to Harley and to Helga, and thank you all for watching here today.